evening, everyone. We want to get this show on the road. Welcome this evening to Generator. It's nice to see so many faces. My name is Michael METZ. I'm one of the board members here, and I have the great honor of being able to introduce our speaker tonight, Alan Newman, good long-term friend of mine, entrepreneur for more years than we would like to admit. But before I do that, I do want to thank our sponsor tonight. This is Hula. Robert LAIR is here. I'm hoping he might speak a few words. Robert is the CEO of a very large new development going on at the old Blodgett plant, our neighbor. Russ and his organization and Robert have agreed to sponsor this speech tonight. And I'd like, Robert, if you take just a minute or two, introduce yourself, talk about what you're doing, and then pass the mic over to Alan, and we'll be entertained.
Thanks, Michael. So I have nothing prepared here at all, but I just want to say a couple quick words. Thank you, Alan, for doing this tonight. We're just chatting out here in the hallway. When I'm with people like Alan, but particularly tonight with Alan, pure creativity, right? Just gets you excited to talk to him. A great entrepreneur, but just gives you energy, right? Gives you energy. He's got that glint in his eye, enthusiasm. It's like you're not going to tell me that I can't do what I want to do in the community and in the world, right? That's what makes it interesting. That's why we're all here to watch him. So thanks for coming. For those of you who haven't heard, Russ and I are ramping up Hula Lakeside right down here, just on the other side right off of Lakeside Avenue, 150,000 square feet. The old Blodgett oven factory right on the lake, lake views kind of in every single direction. We'll probably have 600-700 people down there. We're kind of hand selecting, curating 25, 30 kind of entrepreneurs and businesses that we'd like to incubate and accelerate down there, kind of in the mode of what Alan's doing, very creative place. So check it out. You can find us on the website. I'm happy to give you a card. Alex Court is somewhere back there too. Just seek us out, come on down, take a tour. Interested in business, entrepreneurship, creativity. Alex Court with Alan, that's why they're waving at each other. But do come down. We really want it to be a beacon for the state of Vermont, for business development, for business creation. It's something that Russ saw a couple years ago and had the vision and imagination to say, hey, like Generator 2, it's going to be largely tech down where we are. But I won't say much more, but if you have any questions, love to have you down there and come take a look, okay? So without further ado, a great honor to pass this over to the man. Here he is.
Thank you, Robert. So before I start, when I started my career, such as it has been, in Burlington probably 30, 40 years ago, there were a couple of business people around town who were really, I think, the drivers of the entrepreneurial community. People like Ray Pecor, people like Bobby Miller. And when I was developing my trade, so to speak, there were people around who would answer any question and were really supporting the entrepreneurial community. And I just really want to give a hand to Robert and his team at Hula. That what they're doing down there is just mind-boggling. And to have that in our community is just such an asset. So thank you, Robert. I'm going to experiment a little bit here tonight. I'm going to do a little bit of the unlikely entrepreneurial shtick, and then I'm going to tell some stories. So, for those of you who think that start and run businesses, you should be a good student, you should learn hard, you should go to college, you should get an MBA. Blah! Not true. I was kicked out of 3 schools in 4 years. I avoided business like it was the plague. I couldn't figure out why in the world anybody would ever do something that stupid, get dressed up in a suit, commute on the train, go sit in an office in front of a computer. They didn't have a computer, sorry. Sit in an office. It's just like, I can't do that. So I moved to Vermont, among other reasons. And I couldn't find a job. And so it's called survival. I figured I better figure something to do because I really liked living here at the time. And I just started doing things, and things kind of fell into place. You'll hear some of the stories in a little bit, but the path that I've taken is one that, standing here today, looking back on it, it's almost like looking at a movie of myself. I really, if you had asked me 40, 50 years ago that I would have been in business and I would have started a bunch of businesses and grown a bunch of businesses, I would have said, yeah, right. And I'm probably going to fly to the moon as well while I'm at it, because they're both as likely. And yet, the things I'm going to talk about tonight, I think, are the things that I learned along the way that they were building blocks. I didn't start out just growing businesses. I started out learning basic fundamentals. And so tonight, I'm going to talk about some of those fundamentals, but instead of sitting here preaching to you about those fundamentals, which really bore the shit out of me, I'm going to tell you stories. And I'm going to tell you 3 or 4 stories. Each one is about a principle that I've learned that I consider to be one of the important principles of how I operate. We can do this 2 ways. I'm going to have a show of hands here. Pay attention. I can either tell you the stories and you can all guess what the moral of those stories are, or I can tell you the moral of the stories and then I can tell you the stories and you can tell me whether they make sense to support that moral. So raise your hands if you would rather if you'd rather learn the moral ahead of time or guess at the moral afterward. Learn it ahead of time, raise your hand. Oh, you are the people who want to know what gender your baby is ahead of time. All right, those of you who would rather guess at what the moral was. There's life in here. Since it was close, I'm going to go with it the way I wanted to go anyway. So I'm going to tell you stories. And the first person who can guess what the moral of that story is will get a free tour of the generator. Are there any prizes we can give out? Beer. A free beer. A free beer to anybody who guesses the moral. All right, so I'm going to tell a couple stories. And then you see if you can figure out what the moral of the story is. I'm living in Hanksville, Vermont, up on a mountaintop, building a house and living the good old hippie life back in the 70s. And I needed something to do. So I took a job with a company called Gardens for All. Anybody here know what that is? Figures. I don't think they exist anymore. It's, I think, something else. Anyway, and a guy named Will Rapp was my boss. And I took the job because I wanted to learn about computers and I wanted to learn about mail order. And they had a small division that did both. And I was getting bored with that. And I figured I'd learned what I could learn. And I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to tell Will that I'm leaving? And so one day he comes up to me and says, hey, I got to go do something on Friday. It's a car ride. You want to come with me? And I went, perfect. We go for a car ride. The perfect opportunity to tell him I'm leaving. So we get in the car, and before I can open my mouth, he goes, Alan, we're going to split this company into 2. The not-for-profit version, this other person is going to keep it and run, and I'm going to take the for-profit mail order division, and I'm going to spin it off into a company called Gardner Supply Company. And I'd like you to come along, and I'd like you to be the vice president and run finance and operations. There was no company, folks. So having nothing better to do, I said, cool, I'm in. And so we went off and we started this company called Gardner Supply Company, and we had these fabulous plans. We had a great business plan. Anybody here ever done a business plan? Yeah. So we executed the business plan. There was only one drawback. the business didn't follow the business plan. And so every night, everybody would leave at the end of the day, and Will and I, one of us would stop at the other and go, and we'd sit around and we'd talk about all the different ideas we had for how we could make this business work. And we would talk about this idea, maybe we should switch to this idea, maybe we should switch to that idea. And we could spend hours talking about all the things we could be doing instead of Gardner Supply Company. And luckily for us, before we got to the stupid part and actually started yet another business, luckily the Gardner Supply thing started to work, and we went, this is pretty cool. Maybe we should just stick with this. And so that's kind of the early start of Gardner Supply story. End of story one. There's more coming in case you haven't figured it out yet. So now I leave Gardner Supply Company. I do 7th generation. I leave 7th generation, and I go off and I start this company called Magic Hat. We had the most magnificent business plan, you've ever seen. And it laid out perfectly exactly what we were going to be doing for the next 5 years. And we start the business. Anybody want to guess how much of that business plan actually worked? I'll give you a hint. Give the guy with the zero the answer. Actually, that's not true. About 25% of it worked. But we changed almost everything as we got started because practicality forced change. And a lot of the ideas that we had to let go of, and we had to move to other things that we saw could work. So that's story number 2. And the last story there is, even when you find something that's working, and you sit back and you go, cool, this is pretty damn cool, now I've got it made. You're wrong. If you don't continue, in today's world especially, I think it's always true, but the speed at which things are moving today, if you don't continue to innovate, if you don't continue to change, you are dead meat. And if anybody wants to dispute that with me, I have 4 words. Polaroid, Xerox, Sears, Roebuck. Anybody ever heard of those companies? Before most of you were born, they owned their worlds. They did not see Polaroid. How they missed the digital revolution boggles my mind. I know how it because I worked for a corporate company for about 5 years, and they would have missed it also. But it still boggles my mind. So the last thing I want to add before I see if you can figure out what the key to these stories are, the last thing, does anybody here know what entropy is? The theory of entropy? You don't count. What's the theory of entropy?
Just staying still, not moving.
Incorrect. Blah, blah, blah. Incorrect. Take a shot.
Everything kind of goes from order to disorder over time?
You're better. The classic answer, and one that I live by, is it always takes a lot more energy to create order out of chaos than it does to maintain order. When you're starting a business, guess what you got? Guess what that means? If you don't have the work ethic to just put in the time that it takes, you will fail. And I can give you numerous examples of people who I personally know who tried to start businesses and they just gave up on the business because they only wanted to work 40 hours. If I have to work more than that, I have to give up my lifestyle. Well, I got bad news. Entrepreneurship is a lifestyle. It's not a hobby. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur and really do this, you really gotta you gotta give it what you got, because every day is a new challenge. Okay. So that's my first little piece. Can anybody figure out what the message in all this mess is? Huh?
Just start.
It's close. Just start is a close. Anybody?
Give up your plan and go with what works.
All up, you're getting close. All true. What I'm going to call it is ideas are a dime a dozen. It's execution. That I don't care how good your idea is, you need to make it work. And no business that I've ever been involved with had the right plan to start. They started in a direction. They kept going in the direction, but they had to be creative, they had to be flexible, all the things that all you people said, but you've got to make sure that you execute. And I still believe to this day that it is easier to take a really bad idea with good execution succeed than take a bad idea, no, the reverse. You know what I mean? I'm old. I'm doing the best I can here, folks. So that's the moral of the first story. Number 2. Many years ago, I worked at a international consulting company called ARD. I don't know if it's still around. It was in its early days, run by a very entrepreneurial guy. And he had built this business doing mostly energy-related, alternative energy-related ideas. And this is back in the 70s. Alternative energy was not that hot. Mostly in Africa. So they would go into the small African communities and they'd put in refrigerators, solar-powered refrigerators, so that medicines could be kept cold enough to be useful, all sorts of things like that. I was the business manager. And one day, he says, Alan, we need a telex machine. Does anybody here have a clue what a telex machine is? Excellent. Well, you don't count. You stop raising your hand. For those of you who are looking at me like, huh? A telex machine preceded a fax machine. And it was an incredibly complex device, but if you were communicating to other countries or other time zones, it was really the only way to do it. And so George said, Alan, go find us a telex machine. I said, I'll tell you what, George, I'll make you a deal. Not like I had a real choice here. I said, I'll do all the research, I'll choose, I'll negotiate, I'll get the telex machine delivered. But when they come to do the teaching, how to use this thing, I'm not going to be doing that. I knew that whoever learned how to use this telex machine was in deep shit. They were going to get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. You got to come in. I got to send a telex to Africa. And I didn't want any part of that. I lived in Hanksville in the winter. I'm not driving into Burlington for George's stupid telexes. He said, no problem. We'll have Lisa do the training, and she'll be our telex operator. That's great. So I do all the research. I order it. I negotiate it. They deliver it. The day they deliver it and give us the instructions, Lisa has the good sense to call in sick. There's nobody but me to learn how to use this stupid machine. And I was 100% correct. As soon as it was in, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone would ring. Alan, you got to come in. I got to send this telex out. So I quickly taught Lisa how to do it. And, you know, I always thought, remember, Alan, don't ever volunteer to do those things again. And now, later on, I'm going to tell you why that was the wrong approach. So, end of that. Oh, no, I didn't get to the punchline. I hate it when I do that. So, years later, 3 years, 4 years later, I'm coaching Little League. My son wanted to play Little League. They needed a coach. Okay, I'll coach the team. And there was another father whose son was playing. And about halfway through the season, hey, you want some help? You want me to help you? I said, sure, fine, have a ball. And so over the course of the season, we kind of became friendly. We chat at the end of every day, at the end of every game, and he helped clean up all the stuff, and we'd go our separate ways. And on the last game of the season, we're picking up the bases for the last time, and Tony comes over and he goes, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got this telex machine coming at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I got to send a telex out by 10 o'clock, and I don't have a clue. I said, which machine was it? He goes, pardon me? I said, well, did you get this machine or that machine? He goes, how do you know that? Long story. He says, is there any chance that you could come up at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and send a telex for me? Sure, I'll come up and send your telex. I went up, I sent his telex, and that began the most interesting 18 months of my life, barring any. He turned out to be the most fascinating person. For 18 months, literally on the top of a mountain, north-facing mountain in Hanksville, looking right down the north with all the wind coming at us in this little building that almost got blown away on certain days. We tried to get this really stupid business going, and it was really the beginning of learning how do you put together a business from a concept perspective. The business didn't make it. Tony decided he was going to fly drugs in from Jamaica, got busted, spent 18 months in jail. I lost track of him after that. I'm just glad I didn't go with him. But my point is, it was probably, had I not done that telex machine, I never would have had those 18 months. Number 2. So I'm living in Hanksville, needing a job, and there was an ad for somebody to work in the delinquent accounts department of University Health Center. Now, does that sound like a plum or what? Huh? Who wouldn't grab that job? I didn't have a lot of choice. I needed a job, and they hired me. 2 requirements met. So I went to work. I actually really enjoyed the job. I approached it as these people don't want. I had had enough Dunning calls in my life to know what it was like to be on the other end. And so I approached it as I'm here helping them get out of financial problems. And I actually really enjoyed it. And it was not something that I would consider a career builder, except that one of my best friends at that company left to run a health center in Plainfield, Vermont. And 3 months later, he needed somebody to help him because they were building a new health center. He asked if I would come out and help him run his old health center while he focused on the new health center. And I said, sure, because it got me out of delinquent accounts at University Health Center. And that started a 6 to 8 month career as a consultant working with rural medical health centers and rural medical practices that for 6 or 8 years really supported my lifestyle very well with 2 days a week, 3 days maximum worth of work. So it really worked fabulous for me. Had I not done the job at University Health Center, I never would have ended up on that 6-year run as a consultant with rural health centers. And I still, to this day, have a real itch is the wrong word, appreciation for rural health centers and for the degree of difficulty of being able to deliver health. Third story. We're getting to the punch. Oh, no, we're not. We got one more after this one. The next one's my favorite. How am I doing? Am I okay? Excellent. So when we started Gardner Supply Company, it's a mail order company. Back in the day when mail order meant you actually mailed things, you would mail these catalogs out to people, and they would then order things. And there was something, does anybody here know what a circulation plan is? It's exactly what it sounds like. When you're mailing 1 million catalogs, you don't mail that 1 million catalogs to the same group of people. If you're looking to bring in new customers, you rent segments from a bunch of different lists. So you rent 10,000 names from this list and 10,000 names from that list, and then you track the results on each list, and then if that 10,000 works, maybe you rent 50,000 the next time. If that works, maybe you do 100,000 the next time. And Will, he had a wall. Yeah, this was his wall, and he covered it with paper. And he in hand, with a pen and paper, with a pen and a ruler, he created a graph on this wall with as many as 300 cells going down this column. Pardon? Oh, it gets crazier. And then he'd run it out for 18 weeks. And he would sit there and he would do his projection on, okay, on this cell, how many orders am I going to get the first week, the second week, the third week, through 18 weeks? And I watched him do that I don't know, couple months. It drove me nuts. I had been involved in computers, and I started using spreadsheets, a couple years earlier. And I watched him do this, and I said, Will, this is crazy. You got to put it on a spreadsheet. Alan, I don't do computers. I'll tell you what. Will you let me put it on a spreadsheet? He goes, yeah, have a ball. So I started taking all of his information, and I started putting it onto these massive spreadsheets, and every time he wanted to update it, he'd say, ooh, can you change that? I go, yeah, boom, and it would change. And it was like earth rattling to him. The grunt work that took, and I probably spent days setting it up, and then, I took care of it for a couple of years, until he really took it over. The fundamentals of what circulation planning taught me is the foundation of all marketing. Would you agree? To understand that different groups of people will respond differently, and to see how to track orders over time based on which group of people we were mailing. And to this day, I still use the logic I learned in that stupid circulation planning model that I built only because I couldn't watch Will go through the pain. I mean, he would literally get up with an eraser, and he'd erase whole things and redo them. And then he'd have to recalculate all the columns. It's like, you're crazy. Anyway, so that's story number 3. And my last one is the fun one. Who here knows Johnny Wooden? You're on it. Huh? So you know my whole shtick. So to those who didn't hear it, Johnny Wooden, the greatest basketball coach ever. Anybody want to argue? He did things with UCLA that nobody had done prior or since. I was a huge basketball fan. I was a huge Johnny Wooden fan. I was listening to, it was either Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or, what was the big redhead's name? But it was either Walton. Yeah, but to me, he's still Jabbar. Or Bill Walton. I forget which one tells this story. But it's a great story, and it fits what I need. Every year at first practice, all the players, the seasoned players, the rookies are sitting out there, and all the regulars are waiting. They know what's coming. He says, now I'm going to teach you all how to put your socks on. And they wait for the first rookie to snicker. And it happens every year. Somebody snickers. He goes, excuse me, you find this funny? You don't think it's important to put your socks on right? If you don't put your socks on right, you will get blisters. If you get blisters, you're of absolutely no good to my team. And if you can't do something as simple as putting your socks on correctly, then you have no business on my team because you won't follow my directions later on either. And he then proceeded to teach people he did a whole demonstration on you start with the toe, and then you roll the sock back and you smooth out all the sock until you get up to the top and you've taken all the air bubbles out so there's no chance of getting a blister. So that's my last story on this topic. Anybody see the thread that runs through this? There is a thread here. What's the details? Close enough. No task is really insignificant. This is what we call experience. Nobody is successful without experience. So one of the things that I've come to learn is to love the experience, regardless of whether it's the experience I was looking to have or whether it's the one that's in front of me and I might as well learn it. And again, this may sound simple, but for me it was not. I struggled with this one a long time. I was angry about that stupid telex thing until I started to realize, no, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. That led to a great thing. And when you when, if you know anything about my history, I was unceremoniously dismissed from seventh generation, which I birthed, which I grew, which was my baby. I was then, again, after I grew Magic Hat, and it was again my project. I chose to leave that one, is a fair way to put it. Everybody said, "Well, how do you go on after the disappointments?" And the answer is, they're over. It was a great experience. Would I not do seventh generation again if I knew that it wasn't going to end the way I wanted? Hell no. That was a great experience. Magic Hat, would I not do that again knowing how it ended? Hell no. I mean, it was a kick. I enjoyed every moment. That's not true. But I enjoyed, he knows. But my point is that the experience was invaluable to me. And those are the things that I really try to focus on. So that's the moral of story group number 2. How am I doing on time? Oh, then I'm going to go to my close. I have a big close. Oh, so I got. So I'm gonna do my. This has nothing. This is not part of the same thing, but this is something that I always get fascinated by, and I'd want to talk about a little bit. Michael kind of liked it, and he told me to use it, so I'll use it because I do everything that Michael tells me. Huh? Huh? So when I started in business, I always thought, this is one of the things that I preach to a lot of people. When I first got into business, I always thought the best thing you could do was be a generalist so that you could do all things for all people. I was a consultant. I could be a consultant to anybody. I was a management consultant. What business? Oh, I can do anything. And I really struggled. I went to a conference, an Inc. conference someplace many, many years ago, and I was doing a presentation. I had done my presentation. They threw in a ticket for the conference. I figured, smart people around. I might as well stick around and see what other people have to say. And I go to listen to this guy who starts talking about the importance of specialization. And I went, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard. Why would I want to limit the number of people who I'm pitching to? And in a half hour, he turned me around 180 degrees. His whole point was, if you're a generalist and you can do anything for everybody, then you're competing with everybody for everything. You have no focus, and you have nothing to sell other than your good looks. But if you specialize and you become an expert in your field, then you are now in demand in a smaller market, which lets you focus on where your new business is going to come from. And when they come to you, they know they're speaking to an expert, and there are not a lot of experts in your field. That made sense back 40 years ago. But in the life of the internet, I believe that whole theory of specialization just zooms to the front, because we now have the globe to specialize in. If you want to specialize in funny-looking left toes, you can find thousands of people interested in funny-looking left toes. You can become the global expert in how to take pictures of funny-looking left toes, and you're laughing, you're giggling. But I'm telling you, there's a market out there for people who want pictures of their funny-looking left toes, and you're the only one who can give it to them. So to me, specialization got really fascinating. I'm going to do a little subset. At Magic Hat, when we started, like a lot of beer companies, and I assume this is familiar, most beer companies have anywhere from 6 to 12 different beers they offer at any given time. We were no exception. We probably had 6 to 8 beers out in the market at any given time. We were doing okay. We were one of the pack, doing all right. And I brought in a new president. And the new president said, Alan, we got to cut back our SKUs. We got to offer less products to the market. I said, Martin, we can't afford to give up the cases. He goes, if we cut our SKUs to 3 from 7, our business will go up 20%. I said, who are you talking to? You think I'm an idiot? He goes, I promise. We cut the SKUs back, sales went up 20%. It was magical, blew me away. I've since come to understand it. There were too many damn choices out there. We were confusing the hell out of our customer. More important, beer is a 3-tier system. We sell to distributors, distributors to retailers, retailers to you folks. We were confusing the hell out of the whole chain. Our distributors didn't know what to sell. The retailer didn't know what to put on the shelf. And so frequently our best-selling products were left out of the system. So the more we specialized, the more we focused on. Now, I see Chris probably thought it would be a nice thing to have number 9 here for me, and I've gotten over it, so I appreciate it. But number 9 is another whole story. But as we focused our growth, which was 30% every year from, I don't know, 99 till the day I got out, we grew 30% every year. I don't care how big we got. We still grew 30% because we stayed focused on specialization. We stayed focused on being clear about what beers we wanted our distributors and our retailers to focus on. They were the beers our customers wanted, not all the variety that we, as a group of brewers, wanted to see. So that ends that little foray into nowhere. So now I move into my great finale, as soon as I can find it. Wait a minute. So, 7th generation. We're zooming along. We've developed a catalog at the time. Time was, late 80s? How I ended up in the environmental catalog business is another whole story. But suffice it to say, there was absolutely no market whatsoever for environmental products. There was not a person on the planet who gave a shit. I'm really not, you people, you're laughing. I'm not kidding. It was a category that nobody cared about. But we started doing it anyway, because somebody said you can't do that. And I figured out that the reason people didn't care about the environment was they didn't understand the basics. I'm a pocketbook environmentalist. I think the economics have to go with the product. So we would sell water-saving shower heads, and people didn't buy them. And I couldn't figure out why. It just made sense. So I realized that we needed to explain to people that water is a valuable resource, and depending on where you live, it could either be limited or very expensive. So if you can have a shower head that can deliver a great shower and use 20% of the water, why not do it? So the catalog became half education and half products. It was pretty radical. I mean, nobody did that at the time. We did editorials. We would take up valuable selling space. If you were ever in the catalog business, you measure the success of your sales by sales per square inch. And I would give up some of our most valuable territory to do education, because I believe strongly that without the education, nobody was going to buy our crap. I mean, there was no reason to. So I come in one day, and I go sit at my desk, and on my desk is a brand new catalog. And I look at it, and I went, huh? How in the world did we produce a catalog that I didn't know anything about? Trust me, I was involved in every decision back in those days. Nothing happened without me knowing about it. And here's a catalog, a 7th generation catalog that I had never seen before. And as I'm looking at it, paging through and going, what the hell? It's not exactly right, but it's pretty damn close. As I was reading it, I noticed that a group of people started to gather around my desk. And I looked up and I go, what? And they said, what are you going to do about it? Huh? What are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about what? What are you going to do about them? Who are you talking about? That catalog. What are you going to do about the people that knocked off our catalog? I looked at it. It wasn't a 7th generation catalog. It was a total knockoff. They looked at me and they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to produce the next catalog. And nobody would understand why I didn't want to enter into some sort of legal battle with these people. It wasn't worth it to me. I figured just keep going forward. Story number 1. Story number 2. We're going somewhere. Story number 2. At Magic Hat, we needed a new website. The early days of websites. And so we needed a new website. And so somebody came up with I'm a real sucker for stupid ideas. Somebody came up with what was a really stupid idea. Everybody was doing vertical websites in those days. You see something and then you go down. Their idea was, why does everybody go, horizontal? Everybody was horizontal in those days. Somebody said, why don't we just do it vertical? And you just move right along vertically, and then you don't have to worry about all the ups and downs. Nobody had ever done it before, so that was my first indication to, cool, let's try that. So we did this catalog. We did this website, and we did it so that everything ran vertically. To say that it was a bust is just not even close. I mean, it was a total disaster. Nobody knew what to do. They didn't care. They didn't want to play with it. They logged off. We had there was a very famous company who I shall leave nameless at the moment, who had a very competitive relationship with us. We were good friends at all the meetings, but as long as we were little tiny Burlington, we were good friends. But the moment we started to get bigger, all of a sudden the relationship started to get a little bit tenser and testier. So I knew that they paid attention to what we did. And so one day, I logged on to their website, and what did they do? They went with the horizontal website. And I went, cool, let's see how long that lasts. And 2 months later, it came down. Story number 2, huh? Story number 3. I'm launching Magic Hat in Baltimore. And I'm on the street going from bar to bar. And every bar that I go into has a beer from Pyramid Brewing out west called DPA, Draft Pale Ale. And it's on nitrogen. People here know what that means? It's a slow pour like Guinness, but it's a pale ale, and it was delicious. And I love nitrogen. And every place I went, I see DPA everywhere. I come back and I go, have I got the greatest idea ever? We're going to knock that off. So we had a beer that I thought was even better for that nitrogen than they did. So we took one of our beers, we put it on nitrogen, we renamed it, we did a whole fabulous marketing campaign behind it, maybe the best we ever did. Put it out into the market, and it bombed in a month. In a month, nobody would buy any of it. So about 6 months later, I ran into the guy who ran Pyramid at the time, who was a friend of mine. I said, George, how in the world did you ever get DPA to sell? He looked at me and goes, what are you talking about? It was our biggest disaster ever. I said, but I was in Baltimore. Every place I went, I saw it. He said, yeah, because we were overstocked. We had to dump it someplace. Baltimore was a shitty market for us, so we put it into the market for half price to get rid of it. So, anybody know what the moral of this little group of stories is?
Copying people's a bad strategy.
Or the converse, put into the positive, lead, don't follow. And ever since, I've learned always lead. You know, there's always room for something new and interesting on the market. You start copying other people, you're not authentic, you're going backwards. The market keeps changing. And if you don't stay ahead of the market, so as long as you're leading, you're always looking for what's new, what's next. The moment you follow, you're always one step behind. One last quick story, and then I will give it over to questions, I think. Look at all this. Bill Russell, do people know who Bill Russell is? Raise your hands. Excellent. For those of you who sat with your hands at your side, Bill Russell was probably one of the great basketball players of all time. When his career ended, he got a job on TV as a color commentator for basketball games. And as I said, I was a big fan. He used to talk about something all the time. He used to always say, you know, whenever there was a team, there was a good team that was getting pounded, he would say, you know, you got to remember, no team is ever as good as it looks when it's on a hot streak, and no team is ever as bad as it looks when it's on a cold streak. It's the same team. They just have good nights and bad nights, or good moments and bad moments. And one of the things that I take great solace in and keeps me moving on is that I'm the same guy who is credited with all sorts of brilliant ideas, mostly not mine, by the way. I'm the same guy that did those as the ones that you don't know anything about because they were disasters. And so when things are going well, I do my best not to read my own press clippings, not to let it go to my head, because I know that there's going to come a downside to it. And when those downsides come, as they always do, I try to remember that this too shall pass. I'm not an idiot any more than I was the genius. I have ups, I have downs, I have moments when I hit things well, I have moments when I miss. And those are the things that really help me get through periods like at the end of Seventh Generation, the end of Magic Hat. And it's my rule is always look forward, don't look back. You know, the sooner you know, I always lick my wounds for a little bit, but after I lick my wounds, it's okay, on to the next. And the moment the next starts up, all the pain from the last goes away. And so I leave you with those words. Lead, don't follow. You're never as good as you think you are, nor are you as bad as you think you can be. And just enjoy them both. They're all experiences, and the more experiences you have, the better off you're going to be. So that's the conclusion. How's time? Did I do it? Huh? Excellent. Any questions?
Thanks. It was a great talk. A lot of fun stories. It seems like you were in Vermont at the right time. Although
I was in life at the right time.
That trip to Jamaica might have been a fun trip.
No. When they end badly, they're not fun.
Throughout your talk, you said we a lot, and you're credited with starting a lot of companies, being involved with starting a lot of companies, but they're never just you. How did you go about finding the team, putting it together, getting the right people around it?
I would argue. Can people hear me without the mic? Yeah. Give me a minute. I'm sorry, I'm just hot. That's a great question, thanks. Because I do not consider myself a marketing genius, although I read it all the time. I think my talent is surrounding myself with smart people, creating a culture where people are not afraid to speak up, because, in my opinion, some of the stupidest ideas ever raised have been some of my most successful executions. And so for me, I recognized around 85, I recognized that I need to be surrounded by smart people. And in that group of people, I need a variety of talents. When I started, I really thought that, I really hated detail-oriented people. I am not, by the way, by nature detail-oriented. And I hated them because they always wanted to do details. As I got more experience, I learned to love detail-oriented people. And if you look at my core team, many of whom were with me for 20, 25 years over multiple businesses, they're all people who like to create order out of chaos. I can create enough chaos, and I believe chaos is incredibly important for growing businesses. Somebody has to keep mixing it up, otherwise you don't find the opportunities. But if there's not a team who can execute against that, they won't work. And does that answer your question? Yeah. Anybody else? The nice lady over there. Actually, she's not very nice. But she's very smart. And we love her anyway.
Yeah, Alan. You said something about that 18 months, was it, with Tony was the most significant?
Interesting.
All right. But I don't think we know what that was. We know how it ended, but what happened during that time?
Tony was a Navy fighter pilot who shot down the first MiG in the Vietnam War. He landed on cruisers in 20, 25, 30-foot seas. He would take naps before he went off on. He was really just a very unusual human being. He had made a lot of money after the Navy. He sold arms to all sorts of people who we don't really want to know about, and then he sold a fleet of, I think it was F-14s maybe, to the Shah of Iran when Iran had a Shah. And the deal was, we'll buy your planes, Tony, but you got to come live here for 2 years, and you need to train our fleet on how to fly them and take care of them. And he would tell stories about life in Iran working with the Shah that used to have me in stitches. He had an investor, I suspect, Tony was incapable of telling the truth, by the way. And so everything, I verified the shooting down the MiG on Google, but everything else you got to take with a grain of salt. I'd be sitting in the same room with him and I'd hear him talk to old friends telling things that just have nothing to do with reality. Tony, why you do that? I don't know, it seemed like fun. So I suspect his investor friend made a lot of money in the arms sales, and Tony wanted to get out of arms sales and had this idea. It's probably not a bad idea, it's just way before its time. Tony wanted to start a yacht timeshare company. And he found a guy to put up, I think it was $350,000, which in late 70s money was real money. And Tony had a choice to make. And again, this is a good lesson that I learned there. Tony had a choice to make. Do we buy a single boat and get the business up and running, and then figure out how to raise more money based on the success of the first one, or do we go out full blown? Do we blow the whole $350,000 on setting up the whole system? He had made the decision before I got there to do the whole system, and we ran out of money before we got it going. And it was a good lesson, and it's one that I always take. I used to debate this president I talked about at Magic Hat, who Michael knows, used to debate with me constantly. He used to always say that I had a very high level of acceptance of risk. And I would always say, no, not really. I cut down all my risks. I always start really slow. I start really small. I try to spend as little. Early business is where the greatest learning curve is. So if you have a lot of money, you'll spend a lot of money to learn the same lessons that you can learn on a third of the money. And so I always feel that before I really step things up, I've tested it at low levels. And that was something that I learned from that experience with Tony. Yo.
Execute. Curious how in a small business there's typically an entrepreneur, they're very creative, but as you try to instill a culture of innovation and build a team around that person, how do you think the most effective structure of innovation plays out. And I'd just say, in terms of areas that I've observed it not working, as soon as you divert like the core business and on some innovative thing, it has sometimes paralysis. So I don't know if you have any tricks, but
I don't think it's a trick. I came from operations. Most people don't know this about me. I don't generally talk about it. And so I at least understand how manufacturing works. I understand how operations works. And, you know, my goal is always to keep the bus moving fast enough so that the wheels are always wobbling, but they don't quite fall off. My experience is that that's 30% annually. There's a reason Magic Hat grew at 30% annually. My belief was once you step over that, the wheels start falling off the bus. So 30% growth has always been my target to avoid the chaos from taking over the bus. Beyond that, I think it's, I've had an ops guy, started at 7th generation, went with me to went from 7th generation to Magic Hat, went from Magic Hat to a 5-year project, which I, not incoincidentally, not intentionally left out of tonight. He was with me for that 5-year period. And one of the reasons that I think he sticks with me is I'm always pushing it harder, but never harder than it can handle. And it's just something that I've been able to figure out over the years, partially because I came out of operations, and I can see the signs of stress, and when the stress gets too much, I will, nobody who's ever worked for me will believe this, by the way, but I will back off to try to keep the equilibrium. Also, one of my greatest, everybody's greatest strength, their greatest weakness, I'm a big believer. One of my real weaknesses is I want it all. And so I really had to learn how to control myself to stay focused on what's working and never introduce more than I believe the team can handle at the time. That's the best I can do. Does that help at all? Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
I recognize your hair.
I haven't talked to you about this, but I'm curious if you could talk about crickets and also maybe a lesson that you've learned from your cricket experience recently.
Thank you. Yes to both. Crickets, I heard, I go to entrepreneurial pitches a bit, and there's a young couple that I heard make this pitch about starting a business raising crickets, because crickets are by far the most ecological, cost-effective way to introduce protein into life forms, whether it be animals or people. And the first time I heard it, I thought it was kind of interesting. And then the second time I heard it, for some reason, it just fascinated me, maybe because of the absurdity of it, which I have a real affinity for. And so I decided that I was going to help them build this cricket business. And I installed my ops guy to run it, because there was really nobody who could run it. And we made I raised $600,000 to put into the cricket business. Not an insignificant amount of it was mine. And what we learned was all the things that I will tell you about. All the things that I would tell anybody starting up a business. It's going to cost twice as much to do it. It's going to take twice as long to get it running. And you're going to have problems up the yin-yang, and it's going to be a bitch until you get it working. We had all those problems and more. And we finally got to the point where we had used up our funds, and we really had not developed any traction. bunch of different reasons, not worth going in here. The reality is we didn't develop any traction. And I was faced with, okay, do I put more money in and lead another round of fundraising, or do we shut it down? And after talking with 3 other cricket farms in the industry, we came to the conclusion, which was our conclusion going into it, which is the reason we developed a belief about why it wasn't working. And we wanted to check that belief with these other farms, so we called them and said, so what are you finding? And we heard the exact same story that we had experienced. And we came to the belief that insects are a valuable form of protein. They will become part of our diet. 3 to 5 years from now, maybe 7 years, don't know when, but not today. Humans are not ready, and the cost of farming far exceeded anything. It's a manufacturing business, and why I missed that it's a manufacturing, because I know manufacturing is about scale, and we did not have scale. And so we couldn't manufacture the powder at a price that could be profitable, and the whole crickets, people freaked, and we called all the shareholders together, and we said, hey, here's what we're finding, what do you think? And as a group, everybody said, no, we get it. We came into it knowing that this was really out there. And we agree, and I was just talking to, was I talking to you about this on the way over here? It's you. I was talking about it today to somebody, that, one of the things that I'm most proud of is the way we shut down the cricket farm. We didn't wait until we were totally out of money. We didn't go raise more money and throw more money at, we didn't throw more money at trying to solve a problem that we didn't believe could be solved. We made the decision to shut it down when we had enough money to pay off all of our debts and close it down gently. And we actually also found somebody, one of our shareholders, said, how about you give it to me, and I'll give all the shareholders, I'll take 10% of the business and set it aside for all the shareholders. I'm not going to push on it right now, but you put a lot of money into the branding, into the knowledge, and when times are right, I may bring it back. And if it comes back, all the shareholders may eventually see something from that. But the valuable lesson there was, and it's something that I have feasted on what fascinates me, if you had asked me, what is the reason if I had to pick a single reason that I've been successful, if you consider what I've done successful, and you can debate it any way you want, the answer would be 1946, the year of my birth. I was the leading edge of the baby boomers. I went through the 60s with a group of people who shared a common sense of culture. And so for years, all I had to do was do things that fascinated me. And I had this group behind me that just loved all that stuff because I was just ahead of them. And so they followed right behind me. And so I always had this waiting group of people ready to gobble up my garbage because we shared the cultural similarities. At Magic Hat, I got really lucky because the baby boomers were now too old to drink much beer. But the X-Gen had come in. And the X-Gen, for reasons that I don't know, were really fascinated with the 60s. And so all the cultural cues that worked on the baby boomers worked on X-Gen. This is all retrospect, Ryan. I didn't plan this. And then now we move to the millennials, an entirely different group of people. And if I were doing things today, and I do things entirely different, knowing I can't just use my instincts because I'm not talking to my people anymore. Unless I go into the death industry, which has been my fascination, because that's where we're all going. Any other questions? Over here. I know you.
Yeah. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
I just want to say that the crickets with garlic were actually really good. And I kind of miss it. And I was really looking forward to it. My question is actually, I hear you about sort of, picking one of your great assets and skills is to sort of pick yourself up and run again. But there must be those dark times in any business that sort of, somebody whacks you on the side of the head with a baseball bat, and you kind of have to shake it off. Tell us about how you shake it off.
There's a new, I think it's HBO documentary on Muhammad Ali. And my wife and I were just watching it recently. And we just watched these people getting punched harder and harder and harder. It's like, how in the world did they get up? And the answer is, they do. That's what they do. If you can't do that, you're not going to be a boxer. So I guess the answer to your question, because this is the best I can do, I'm fascinated with it. I don't know. I think it's part of who I am. And obstacles never stop me. They never have. I see an obstacle, I'm ready to climb over it, find a way over it. I get up, I pick myself up, and I can remember only one time in my entire life with all the business ups and downs, and trust me, I have had plenty of ups and downs. I've probably had as many, if not more, downs as ups. I don't know. I think it's a great question. What I think I do best is I let go quick and I look forward. And otherwise, I couldn't do this.
One more? Sure. One more? Yeah.
I got paid for 3 hours.
Hi. So I was just wondering, you talked a little bit about this, but when do you get to the point in one of your business ventures where, you were mentioning early on as 7th Gen, you kind of thought it was going to be kaput, like in the early days, and then all of a sudden you had this glimmer of hope, so you kept going. When do you make that educated decision of like, all right, this is it, we have to call it quits, and when do you decide, you know it in your gut, you want to keep going, you're going to keep pushing and kind of see it through to the end or wherever it takes you?
I've only called it quits once. So I don't know that I'm a good person to talk to about that. And probably the reason I quit on that one, if crickets had been my thing, I don't know if the situation would have been different. It wasn't my thing. I was investing in a couple who were passionate about this. And I thought they were dead on. I thought it was worth supporting it. And I never had an emotional connection to crickets. Every other business I did, I had an emotional connection to. And so the idea of quitting it, honestly, never occurred. And quite frankly, it should have. In many occasions, I should have at least thought, well, maybe this is time to hang it up. I don't think I ever had that thought. So I'm a bad person to ask. I don't know the answer. I think for me, when it's my business, I have an ability to use both intellect and emotion. When it's somebody else's business, when I'm evaluating somebody else, I get more emotional about it, and I don't use as much intellect. So I think somehow you need to balance the two sides of the brain and make the decision on, is this worth going on? Can I take the worst case scenario if I move on? And if I can, and I'm emotionally connected and it's important to me, then I continue on. When that doesn't exist, the business isn't working, I have no emotional connection, okay, it's time to call it quits and move on. Sorry.
Thank you.
Fantastic.